Welcome again. Thank you for joining us for our Breakthroughs in Black Homeownership panel, with thanks to our panel sponsor, Wells Fargo. We are excited. We are excited to get this panel started shortly. Just a quick orientation. Attendees, you will see a chat box and a Q&A box, both directly to the right of this live stream video. Use them to communicate with other attendees and to send questions for consideration by our moderator. This panel is followed immediately by breakout sessions. You can access those breakout sessions after this panel is over at the main agenda page. If you are having technical difficulties, check out our FAQs up top for how to get support, or click on the red icon in the lower right corner. With that out the way, let's get this session started. Thank you all.
Good afternoon and welcome to the 2021 Affordable Homeownership Summit. As Dakari shared, this is the Breakthrough in Black Homeownership session in partnership with Wells Fargo. My name is Salima Etoka, and I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff here at the Center for New York City Neighborhoods. I have the distinct honor to be in conversation today with Kristen Brody, Jerrod, Delaine, and Tonya as we explore what communities and groups are doing across the country to undo historic injustices, uplift Black communities, and create equity within the homeownership journey. And so today, I'll have the panelists introduce themselves in a few minutes. We'll then move into the moderated part of the discussion, and then we'll have time for Q&A. And with that, let's get started. We'll have Kristen here. And Kristen, would you please introduce yourself, tell us where you work, and what you're excited to discuss today? Thank you.
Thank you, Salima. I'm so happy to be here today. My name is Kristen Brody. I'm a fellow with the Metropolitan Policy Program at the Brookings Institution and professor of financial economics on leave from Dillard University. And I'm happy to provide some background on the Black-white home ownership gap and to provide some data and hopefully talk about what we can do about it.
Thank you. Next, let's have Jerrod answer the same question.
Hello, everybody. Jerrod, Delaine here. I'm a professor at Pratt Institute School of Architecture and their real estate practice program. Really excited to be here to provide some perspective from both not only the academia side, but also as a practicing designer and real estate developer. I'm hopefully going to be part of a lively conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerrod. And Tonya, let's have you introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Tonya Orris. I am the Executive Director for Neighborhood Housing Services of Brooklyn CDC, also known as NHS Brooklyn. We are a nonprofit housing organization. We're HUD-approved housing counseling agency. And we provide residents with the tools they need to buy and repair and keep their homes. And we're a strong advocate for affordable and safe housing. I am super excited about the discussion today, more so because 10, 15, 20 years ago, we didn't have this conversation. We had these conversations behind closed doors. We had these conversations after the meeting when we huddled together. But because of so many discussions throughout the past year or so, we're having these conversations more and more, and it's very exciting. And I'm excited about the organizations and the foundations and corporations and financial institutions that's really taken this subject on and creating innovative programs to address the situation.
Thank you so much. Again, we're so excited to have you here. And so now we'll have all the panelists join me, and so we can get started with some of the questions that we have developed. And before we get into the solutions, I wanted us to just start around this idea of how did we get here? which I borrowed from my favorite comedian, Amber Ruffin, who is a Black woman. And with that, what I mean is, we saw in the Center's Black Homeownership Project, the research findings that Black homeowners within New York City has decreased in the last 20 years. If we look across the country, we see that, Black homeowners or potential homeowners are paying more when it comes to closing costs, when it comes to higher interest rates. I could go on and on about these statistics on the situation, of Black homeownership in this country, but I'm going to stop there. And I'm going to ask you all, starting with Tonya, how did we get here? What led in terms of policies or practices that led this to happen? And please, you can go ahead.
Sure. Thank you again. So how did we get here? That's a very loaded question, and we don't really have too much time to talk about all of the reasons how we got here. But just looking at the different programs in the process, over time, housing prices have increased. So there's the housing prices increase, the programs and products remain the same in terms of the guidelines. So there's a catch-22. So it's we have to, change has to come through changing every aspect of the approach of creating affordable housing products for Black families in particular. So just in terms of, housing prices definitely increased. The programs that's offered now, even if it's more grant funds, the guidelines remain the same. So the income guidelines are the same, but the cost of living, it has increased. Everything else around us is changing, but the guidelines remain the same. Realistically, homeowners or home buyers, they're one paycheck away from falling behind on their mortgage. On paper, especially for new home buyers, there is reserve because that's one of the requirements as a new home buyer. But realistically, the reserves are retirement funds. They're funds that you cannot really get to immediately. So those are some of the reasons for how we got to the place that we're in, and why the divide has increased.
Thank you so much, Tonya. And Jerrod, let's have you go. Whether you want to speak specific to New York City or the country, can you help us understand the Black homeownership gap?
So I actually like that segment of the Amber Ruffin show, the How Did We Get Here? It's actually a great part of the show. They hit all these little facts as fast as possible. But yeah, so let me try to do the same. Let me try to cover, 100 years of housing policy in 2 minutes. Basically America created FHA, the Federal Housing Authority, to provide home loans, which encouraged single-family home ownership. From 1934 to 1968, Black people could not get those loans. So segregation was legal for a very long time. 1968, they passed the fair housing laws. Now they can't legally do it. But there are a number of things that were just kind of stuck in the system that took the 60s, 70s, 80s to kind of unravel. So we're at least 2 to 3 generations behind in the home ownership equity game. During that time, America has saw one of the greatest wealth creations known to mankind, largely off home ownership. And still today, the vast majority of Americans' wealth is in their home. So we're literally, starting the race from way behind. So that, in short, and amongst a number of other things like lending and insurance, a number of other things. But that is, I'd say, the biggest factor in the equation.
Thank you, Jerrod. And next, Kristen, we would love to hear your thoughts on this question of how did we get here?
So I think the first step is to say what is here, right? Because we know that there's a gap. What is the gap? So according to a report by Zillow, between 1990 and 2018, the home ownership rate between Black and white households increased from 27.6 percentage points to 30.3 percentage points, right? So the gap is getting wider during that time period, which we would be thinking that we'd be seeing the opposite, right? But we're not. An analysis by Charles and Hurst from 2002 found strong evidence that Black mortgage applicants were almost twice as likely as comparable white households to be rejected, even when their credit history proxies and measures of household wealth were accounted for, right? So it's not even about credit necessarily. So we see that discrimination is still happening. I would also point out that in addition to Black people being less likely to own homes, that when they do, their homes are worth less, right? So the home is worth less, and that means that they have less equity. So again, from Zillow in 2020, the typical home owned by a Black and Latino homeowners was 16.2% and 10.2% respectively less valuable than the typical home overall, right? So those are just some specific numbers to talk about these gaps that we're seeing, even when you account for credit.
So thank you all for taking the moment to help us understand again how we got here and what we mean by getting here. And so now that we have that basic understanding, I do want to move into solutions and what's being done or could be done to address, again, this gap. And so one of the questions I do have is actually around finance, in terms of what innovation in finance can help aspiring Black homeowners be able to get down payment assistance, right? Black homeowners who have repairs in terms of financing those repairs, and then just other aspects of this homeownership journey. And with that, I'm going to start with Jerrod. Innovations in finance to help Black homeowners or aspiring homeowners. What do we currently have in place?
In the state of New York, our new governor just passed an initiative where you can get $100,000 toward a down payment, which is amazing. You all should look it up right now. And basically, for someone who makes 80% of AMI or a family of 3 that makes up to $86,000, can get a substantial amount of money to help with their down payment. So, as I mentioned earlier, FHA, the vast majority of mortgages in the country today are done by FHA. That's because the government incentivized it. So one of the ways in which we can do it is using the government incentives. Now they can't keep us out because we're Black. We should try to use those tools like everybody else is using today.
Thank you. And then Kristen, do you have any thoughts on this question around helping down payment assistance, home repairs, or other aspects of the homeownership journey?
So at the Brookings Institution, we have a project called Buy Back the Black that we're looking at in cities like Baltimore, Detroit, and others, where basically we're looking for nonprofits, corporations, and others to help support buying not just individual homes or businesses, but whole Blacks, so that people can purchase homes, rent space for businesses, and help to increase their household wealth.
And then Tonya, what are you seeing also in New York City or specifically in Brooklyn around this question?
Well, the New York City is promoting, I guess, the down payment and closing cost assistance program that Jerrod just mentioned. But in addition to that, our local banks, our local partners, they have a true understanding, more so now, and I'm glad I'm seeing more of our partners, have a basic understanding on the need to provide layered funding. So in addition to this, whatever the city and the state is offering, the individual banks are also providing down payment and closing cost assistance, and that's allowed. So, there's more and more opportunities for nonprofit organizations to apply for these programs and be creative in how to specifically target those who need it the most. And the city and the state, they are open to new ideas. And if they're not, just try again until somebody will listen to you. But it works. If you persevere and you are persistent and you believe in what the program could do, please just continue to do it, and it'll definitely work. These programs allow Black homeowners specifically to provide additional support towards down payment and closing costs. The savings may not be sufficient, especially now, and any and all opportunities are welcome. So those are the things that are really helping the industry and helping just in terms of innovation. But you just need to look at the request for services, the trends, what's needed, and how we can support those challenges with offering different resources.
And thank you, Tonya. We'll have Kristen add on to this segment.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something really quick. Tonya, what you said about banking made me think about Black-owned banks and bankers, right? So as we think about how do people get mortgages, they get mortgages from banks. And over the last 3 decades, we've seen the number of Black-owned banks or minority deposit institutions decrease drastically. And we're also seeing overall fewer banks in Black majority neighborhoods. So not only are there fewer Black-owned banks than there were, say, 30 years ago, but there are fewer banks overall in Black neighborhoods. And even when there are banks, as I said before, we know that Black people are being discriminated against and that they're less likely to be approved for mortgages. So one of the things that I think we should see, hopefully, is investment in Black-owned banks. And for some of the big corporate banks to increase their hiring of Black individuals, to support programs at HBCUs and other minority serving institutions, to increase the number of Black bankers, right? Because we're less likely to see bias in ourselves. We're not going to discriminate in ourselves. And looking at other things other than credit in order to judge whether or not people are going to pay.
Thank you, Kristen, for adding on to that. Again, on this theme of innovations, I would like to go to Tonya and see if you could speak to innovations at the neighborhood or community level and what's being done within Brooklyn, again, to support and uplift Black homeowners.
So there was 2 programs that was very innovative, and I'm hoping that they're brought back. One was the First Home Club that was offered by the banks, and it was a cash match program. It motivated first-time home buyers to save, and it assisted them in the down payment and closing costs. Another program that I wish could be replicated is the 203K program on the purchase rehab. Many of the homes in our district really need repair. So instead of purchasing a home and then trying to get a loan or use credit cards to make repairs, offering a purchase rehab product works. And limiting those repairs to focus on major arteries in the home, electrical, plumbing, things that will most likely make a new home buyer fall behind if they're faced with this challenge. Opportunities, like I said before, for nonprofit organizations are still provided. NHS Brooklyn, we were innovative and we're able to pivot from last year, and we're offering more housing education. So education is key to everything we do. So I'm a strong advocate as well as other nonprofit organizations for housing education. And we also started a property management program. So we all know that there's an affordable housing issue, and we can't really build our way out of this issue. So we have to look at existing home ownership, existing homes, and how we could be creative, making illegal units available and legal, so there's more income and more housing established. And also looking at the existing home and saying, well, how can we protect and preserve these homes and prevent foreclosure, and assist in housing counseling, for tenants to allow them to purchase a home one day. So, some of the innovations are around that, and most likely is homeownership education is key.
Thank you, Tonya, for sharing so much about the work that you're doing within Brooklyn. And Jerrod and Kristen, you have an opportunity to speak, whether about New York City or right across the country, on innovations at that community or group, community or neighborhood level.
You first, Kristen.
Okay. So I can't say which one yet, but one of the very big fintech companies is looking at this issue. I wish I could tell you who, but the report is coming out soon, so I can't say. But one of the things that they've been considering is things other than the FICO credit score, right? So how can we gauge credit worthiness without looking at the FICO score? Because we know that Black people specifically, on average, have lower credit scores than white people and or Asian people. All right. And we know that things stay on your credit report for 7 or 10 years. So what are the workarounds for that? So looking at things like payment history, your income, how long you've lived in a particular neighborhood, things of that nature are what they're looking at. And then also ways to get around actually having to have a checking account or a savings account at a bank. Because if you don't have good credit, or you've overdrawn several times, or you don't have a steady address, things of that nature can block people from getting bank accounts. And so this particular fintech company is looking at, one, ways for people to save their money, to have access to it other than banks, and metrics other than the FICO score. And both of those things would help people to accumulate wealth and be able to buy homes and other assets.
I'd say on a local level, one thing that's becoming very popular is the community land trust. This idea of a collective ownership it's growing in New York City. So I think that's a innovative way to get ownership that isn't the traditional single family home mortgage type format.
And I think, Jerrod, staying on this question, I'll just add this statement and then maybe you can respond to it, right? The community land trust model, yes, for Black homeownership, but sometimes there seems to be this tension between increasing Black wealth and wanting to increase the number of Black homeowners. What do you make of that? And, anything you want to offer us today?
I was supposed to speak in an event one time, and they were like, Jerrod, can you just leave this like part about money out? And I was like, if we're talking about Black communities and we're not talking about money, like what are we talking about? that we need to be a part of the game too, because somebody's going to own the dirt, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be us. So I think innovative ways to do that. I think we should explore all of our options. It's the short answer. The best way to do it, just doing it the way our grandparents' way, as we've learned with, Airbnb and Uber, like there's different ways to do things that we traditionally did before. So I think it's a great idea.
Okay, well, thank you for speaking on that. And next, I want to go actually to this question of what are the biggest trends in homeownership that you see in the future for Black America? And Tonya, why don't we have you start?
Trends. Okay, so we did notice that there's more and more millennials purchasing homes and coming together. So it's more partnerships than anything else. So there's a reality that they cannot obtain or they're not eligible for down payment and closing cost assistance. So there's partnerships being formed and to purchase their first homes. So that's innovation. That's innovative. Also, just using the resources that's available. Families are able to come together and This is not new for many cultures, for families to buy a home and then after a year or two buy another home. But it's becoming more and more important, and is a necessity for Black families. So they're doing that as well, just coming together and saying together we could purchase a home, and laying out a plan. So creating a plan so the entire family could be homeowners within a certain time. So that's definitely innovative. More and more tenants right now are saving for many reasons, and home ownership has increased, tripled, just in terms of request and education. And of course, we know that there's a moratorium in place, and people are saving funds and in pursuit of home ownership. So there's more and more buyers, but less supply. So we just have to think about that as well.
Thank you, Tonya. And let's have Kristen go. What are the biggest trends in homeownership that you see in the future for Black America?
So I think if we're going to look at homeownership, we have to look at wealth, which was mentioned before, right? And you'll see a trend. I like numbers. So I just want to talk about the Black-white wealth gap. The number that you hear on CNN and MSNBC and everywhere else is a Brookings number, all right? So in 2019, the median net worth of a typical white household was $188,200, and that was 7.8 times greater than the typical Black household, $24,100. So I guess as we look at wealth and unemployment and everything else, that has to be our starting point. 188,200 versus 24,000, right? We know that so Black people have less wealth, they have lower income, they have higher unemployment rates, they're less likely to be able to own homes. And so as we see house prices going up, we know that these various stimulus benefits are going to run out. The eviction moratoriums are going to end. COVID is not yet over. It doesn't sound good, right? Like we were going in the right direction before the pandemic, but we know that the pandemic has hit the Black community very hard, both economically and in terms of health, right? So, like I said, I feel like we've made progress, but it doesn't look like we're going in the right direction right now.
Thank you, Kristen. Let's have Jerrod share his thoughts on the future trends in homeownership.
The current trends, I guess I'll say before COVID and after COVID. Before COVID, lots of young people want to live in cities, want to live in urban cores. They're working longer, getting married later, having kids later, having less kids. Women are leaders of households, which 2 generations ago, that wasn't necessarily as much the case. Women with master's degrees and doctor's degrees are leading households. Post-COVID, post-COVID, there's now a lot more desire to move to the outside of cities. And home ownership is at an all-time high. Now it's this weird thing where the suburbs are expensive and cities are expensive. So I think at this current juncture in time, we're in a very weird place where young people are graduating college with a lot more debt than the generation before them. And housing is much more expensive. So I think, as Kristen was kind of alluding to, there's some real headwinds that the young people are running into now. So we have to be very thoughtful going forward to look at homeownership and start the wealth gap creation.
And thank you all for answering that. And actually, Jerrod, I'm going to ask you this question. And again, it can be as brief as possible, but we know that there is a lack of affordable supply, right? And I know it came up, actually, I think Tonya also mentioned it. And so are there any innovations that you're seeing in terms of construction and design that is addressing this issue of affordable supply?
There's a few things going on right now. Last couple of years, people were looking at micro units, how to make smaller space. I personally think co-living is still a great option, especially for young people. Now they can remotely more often. They can work from anywhere. As I mentioned earlier, like they're having kids later, they're getting married later, so they don't need as much space. They can use Seamless to order food, so they don't cook as much. So there's now a more diversity of housing options. So hopefully that eases the constraint of housing supply, to give, a little bit of release to the scarcity of housing supply, hopefully.
And thank you, Jerrod. And Kristen, I'll actually go to you because of something that you said right around the pandemic and the reality that we're in. And so my question to you is, why should Black homeownership be promoted when there is a shortage of affordable rentals and an epidemic of homelessness?
I would push back on the shortage, right? And the reason for that is there's so many vacancies, right? Like all of these condo buildings. I'm thinking about Chicago after the 2007 to 2009 crisis, where they had built all of these condo buildings that didn't sell, right? There are all of these hotel rooms that are vacant because business travel has decreased, right? Like even once the pandemic is over, we will have seen people working from home more, right? Companies are realizing people don't have to come in. But I think the thing is, when we think about working from home and who's able to do that, looking at the data, we see that Black and Hispanic people are much less likely than white and Asian people to be in positions to work from home at all, right? So I think two things: converting some of the space that is currently available to become housing, because there really isn't a shortage of space. Increasing training and education for underserved minorities so that they can get into jobs that are not at risk of being automated and that can be done from home. And then finally, in terms of programs like Buy Back the Black, looking at other metrics of credit so that Black and Hispanic people can afford then the housing that is available.
Thank you for answering that question. And now let's pivot to something a little bit different, but again, related to this theme. And we know that in January, New York is likely to inaugurate its second Black mayor in its 396-year history. And so as we just think about that, do you have any advice for this mayor? And Jerrod, we're going to start with you.
The advice I would give is to be bold. It's an incredible moment. As you mentioned, we're about to have a Black mayor. We have a Black lieutenant governor now. In the Bronx, we have a Black woman as the borough president now. A Black woman as VP in the country. So it's a pretty incredible moment that we're standing in right now. So we just need to maximize the moment.
Kristen, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, so I'm so happy that you mentioned Vice President Kamala Harris, my soror. I think that it's great that we see more African Americans and particularly African American women in these positions. Unfortunately, though, their presence does not end racism, just as having President Barack Obama as our first African American leader didn't. So again, I'm happy about that, but I think that the local programs are the ones that make a difference. And so to that end, I think that we need to focus on voting, which is another one of my research areas. Everything from voting on people that are going to sit on the school board, other people, on up to governors and the president, right? Because those are people that can affect zoning rules or regulations, right? When we look at places like California and how many garage spaces or parking places you're going to have and what different spaces can be used for, right? So I can't speak for the whole country, but in different areas, we have different needs, housing shortages, or the housing is too expensive, or that it needs to be zoned different, or that there's discrimination, right? So I think that all of these are things that we need to look at, but they need to be looked at on a local level, and who we all vote for makes a difference in what happens in that regard.
Thank you, Kristen. And then Tonya, what advice do you have for this mayor?
Well, in addition to Jerrod's response in terms of being bold, which is which is priority, I think creating opportunities for residents to stay in the city. We know that there's a mass exodus now, not because they don't want to be here, but they can't afford to be here. So, look at the programs that's being offered by the city. And, one or two tweaks could make a big difference. And a tweak in even the LMI areas, so some banks, they have products available, but it has to be in a low, in a certain area. Widen that gap, use your power and change the guidelines. So, you could keep people in New York City. This is a great city, and we want to keep those who love the city and was born here and want to stay here. So why not create the opportunities to do that?
Can I add one piece?
Go ahead.
If the mayor is listening, create incentives for developers to build home ownership. Yes. That would be incredible. So somebody send that over to Eric Adams.
For anyone tweeting, that was a tweet right there for you. Grab it and send it out. So thank you. And now let me see here. Actually, a quick question for Kristen, which is, when do you think the white paper that you mentioned will be coming out?
Soon is all I can tell you. Very soon. I mean, it's done. Very soon. They're supposed to be sending it to the Biden administration. So very soon. As soon as it comes out, I'll let you all know.
Okay, thank you. And that was a question from our audience. The other question from the audience I wanted to bring up is around CLTs. Like, how do you think we can incorporate that model to increase homeownership for Black and Brown families, given the lack of available land for new development, especially in New York City? So for Jerrod or Kristen, if you want to take a few minutes to discuss that.
It largely works for existing buildings in New York. And it was much more prevalent when buildings were cheaper. Now that buildings are not cheap, and it's not cheap at all to build a brand new building, there's very few resources available to finance it, to then hand it over to a CLT for ownership. So there's this gap, we want it. There's no tool to help us create it. Unfortunately, that's kind of sort of where we stand here in the city.
Okay, and let me go to my last question, because I see we're coming up on time, which is that from redlining to gentrification, how can government and fiscal policy be changed to prevent further destabilizing of Black communities? And actually, Tonya, let's have you start.
That's a loaded question. So, the government, I sound like a broken record, but it really depends on the creation of the guidelines and the restrictions that's in place. More opportunities will present itself if the guidelines were reviewed and changed.
Thank you, Tonya. And Kristen, let's have you speak to this question.
All right, so a couple of things. Increased funding for HBCUs will increase the number of Black college graduates who are going to get better jobs and make more money and be able to afford homes. Number two, increase the number of Black-owned banks by providing funding for them and removing some of the regulations that caused their numbers to decrease in the first place. While that's happening, hire more Black bankers at banks that currently exist. And the last thing is stop voter suppression so that people can have an easier time voting to put people in office who will do the things that I just said.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you for being able to connect that right to other issues that also impact housing. And then Jerrod, what are your thoughts on this question?
So at Pratt, we created the desegregation think tank. And, the general idea is how can we use housing, as a catalyst for improving our communities? Because housing was largely one of the tools that in education was the tool used to separate us. And the government was the executor of that tool. So they should help us get out of this mess. So the FHA was created as a tool that incentivized and was profitable for all involved. So they should actually provide incentives to help us improve Black communities like it improves all the other communities. So that would be, my suggestion is the federal government getting in it and sustaining it over time.
Well said. And what a way to end this conversation. And again, it's been an honor to be here with you all. I've loved the discussion, right? Everything that we're learning about, Brooklyn, about New York City and the country. I love the connections that you all were able to make with, again, policies that were passed in this country and have led us to here. Again, we defined what here means, but we also talked about innovations, right? At the community level, we talked about, right, fintech. And when this paper that Kristen mentioned comes out, she will let us know. And then Tonya was able to share about her work within Brooklyn and what's being done. And so it truly has been an honor to be here with you today. Thank you to everyone who's attending, right, this summit, who attended this session. And thank you for the questions that we were able to get. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of the summit, as there'll be other great discussions that are coming. Thank you so much.
Hello again, all. Thank you for expanding and amplifying our conversations about Black homeownership. It's deeply important to our city, to the communities we serve, and to me personally. At the Hub, majority of the homeowners we help are Black, so we spend a lot of time listening and working with Black homeowners to solve problems and identify solutions. We make connections to longstanding programs and services, and also new and emerging programs like pilots for our Black homeownership project that offer free services for homeowner landlords, a majority of whom are of a color, and estate planning support for homeowners as well. Now, we're going to take 20 minutes for something many of you requested and missed in our in-person summits. Time to make new connections and refresh old ones. We can't build an equitable recovery alone, so join us in our breakout rooms by clicking on the agenda page and click Join Session next to Building Relationship. You'll be hosted in small groups for about 8 to 10 minutes and sorted into new groups for a second round. No pressure, easy conversations. Afterwards, click back on the agenda page and join the session for Risk Beyond Balance Sheets at 3:50 p.m. I'll see you there.